Good morning and welcome to the respiratory system. This is probably going to be the last system we can get really into. I would love to, do a snapshot for the urinary system, but this might be the last one we get to kind of cover because the ending is coming of school. All right, so just a little bit about the main parts of the respiratory system. So I'm chopping up this into two, so main parts and then exactly the exchange of gases between the atmosphere and your lungs, right? So how do we breathe? Look at this puppy in this cute yoga position. Adorable. Oh, nope, it's not gonna go. There we go. All right, purpose. So again, transporting gases to and from the cardiovascular system, right? Completely links up with our last system, getting oxygen from the atmosphere to the blood and removing carbon dioxide. So we're gonna be taking a look at this kind of main groups of structure here. So how we take in air, get rid of carbon dioxide, and again, this directly relates to the cardiovascular system, right? Since your heart is the one moving around these materials, bringing blood to the lungs to grab that oxygen, and then get rid of the carbon dioxide. So some parts that are important for the respiratory system. So something very important would be your frontal and sphenoid sinuses. So you have these giant pockets of space behind your face, essentially, right? Talking about the skeletal system, I brought up that your skull, as much as it's very hard bone to protect your brain, it's mostly holes back there, one, so you can actually hold up your head, so it's not too heavy, but two, these are where your sinuses are. So these big, spots here. So your frontal sinus clearly would be near the front, right, frontal of the head. It's behind the brow ridges. It filters out air carried in by the nose. So what's important is when you breathe in, you normally breathe in through your nose. So all that air first travels into the frontal sinus cavity where it can actually be filtered out. So it has antibodies and mucus to make sure it gets all the gross stuff out of there. You also have the sphenoid sinus. So you've got back here near where the sphenoid bone is, right? Is going to discharge mucus to the nose. Again, mucus is used to make the air moist. No one likes that word, but moist. That way it's easier on your throat and your nasal cavity. The mucus also traps any bad stuff that might be in the air when you're breathing in. So, nasal cavity. Now, again, right now, you're breathing. You're probably not noticing, but you're breathing mostly through your nose. That is the main opening for the respiratory system. Again, it helps to keep the air warm, moisturized, and it filters it. You've got little hairs in there, trapping things like dust and pollen and anything that happens to contaminate the air. So it's good. Breathing in through your nose is great because it filters out the air. Now, let's just say you get sick. Your nose gets stuffy. Well, you have to have some kind of other opening in order for you to breathe, so that it would be the oral cavity. This is a secondary opening, meaning that it's still providing the same thing, right? It's actually a shorter distance, which means like you're able to obtain oxygen faster through your mouth, but there's not a lot of filtration, meaning that when I breathe in through my mouth, I have less antibodies and less cells in there to take care of filtering it out, meaning I could be taking in a lot more bacteria that are now traveling inside my body. So it's always highly recommended really about breathing through your nose. And that makes sense because that's most comfortable for you. Try it. Try just for, the next 15 minutes, only breathing through your mouth. It's difficult, it's trying, you don't want to do it, it's, again, uncomfortable. So naturally, you want to breathe through your nose. So once air kind of travels into the nose, right, we're going to go off of our main opening, it's going to travel into your cavities and then towards the back of the throat. Back of the throat is the pharynx. We talked about this with the digestive system, right? It comes back. So the pharynx is the back of the throat, right? Separated into things, the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. Just talking about the different spots that sits. Nasopharynx is up near the nose, oropharynx is near the mouth, right? Oral. And then laryngopharynx is near the larynx, your voice box, right? This is kind of what the voice box looks like in this picture here, which is cool. These are the vocal cords that open and shut with vibrations, which is what is helping you to speak, make noise, right? And then we have the epiglottis there as well. So the epiglottis is going to be about like right here, making sure that the flap between the trachea and esophagus goes back and forth so that way you don't have water going down your trachea. So these actually, again, are brought back from the digestive system. And when we talked digestive system, we talked about pharynx, larynx, but then the esophagus down to the stomach and so on. But now we're switching it to the other side, which is the trachea. The trachea is the tube that you can feel if you press your fingers up against your neck right now. As I'm talking, and if I press, I can feel those vibrations, right? I'm touching my trachea. You can actually also feel like the little rings of your trachea. So, just an up-close picture. Again, here is the nasal cavity, right? So all of this air comes into here. It's filtered through the frontal sinus. This sphenoid sinus is here helping to make mucus. And then it comes down, and now we're talking about this guy here, the trachea. So here's the trachea, also called the windpipe. It's made from hyaline cartilage, which means that it's bendable, so you can press it. So again, if I take my finger, I can move my trachea a bit, right? Like you can touch it, and you can feel these cartilage rings. You can see that they have different kinds of cartilage here that make up these kinds of rings. You can feel them if I were to trace my hand or my finger down my trachea and press a little bit, like you can kind of feel these ridges, right? So this is what the air is going to pass through, right? Providing a clear way to enter the body. And it's also, again, going to help trap any contaminants. So further filtrating, because that's important. The air that you want to take in needs to be clean air. So here is our trachea, this tube, and the tube is going to branch off into branches. It kind of looks like an upside down tree. If you were to turn this picture upside down, it'll look like a tree. So here is the main trunk, right, your trachea, and then we're going to branch off into something called bronchi and bronchioles. So here's my primary bronchi, so that's what it splits off into first, right, left and right, because that's where your left and right lung sits. The second bronchi carry lungs into the different lobes. So primary bronchi goes to left and right lung, and then the secondary bronchi is going to go to the different lobes of the lung. So you can see here, because there's only two main secondary bronchi, this is where there's 2 lobes. This one has 3, so that means this has 3 lobes. And then tertiary bronchi splits into the bronchioles, which is going to get even smaller. So this is what's going to actually regulate airflow. So it's kind of like a hierarchy, and again, you could think about it like an upside down tree. So our main trunk or branch is the trachea, splits off into the primary bronchi, which is left and right lung. And then that's going to split off the secondary bronchi, which goes into the different lobes. One of your lungs has 3 lobes, one has 2. And then the tertiary bronchi are actually going to split into smaller branches called bronchioles, which are smooth muscle tissue that helps to regulate the air coming into the lungs. So this is just another picture. Again, you can see trachea here, primary, secondary, and then tertiary. Oh, my favorite, alveoli. All right, the word slightly looks like ravioli. It's not a ravioli, alveoli. So what these are, they're at the very ends of the bronchioles. They're the last little parts that sit in the lungs. This is what's actually going to exchange the gases. They have capillaries. Capillaries are important because that's where arteries and veins come together in order to switch over nutrients. So alveoli look like these little sacs, they look like popcorn, that sit at the ends of blood vessels that are actually exchanging oxygen and exchanging carbon dioxide. So they're grabbing in the oxygen and sending it to fresh blood that's going to go back to the heart, and then they're also going to be absorbing things like carbon dioxide, so that way when you exhale you get rid of it. Right, so this is the tiniest part right at the bottom, like not bottom, but the last little part of the lungs going from those branches are the alveoli. Again, these sacs help to pass things along into the capillaries. All right, so we kind of, talked about this whole entire branch system inside the lung, but the lung. So large spongy organs that are surrounded by pleura membranes. So there's a membrane around it. That's just to make sure that while it's inside your thoracic cavity, it's not touching anything, it doesn't get stuck anywhere. That would hurt a lot. So the left and right lungs are different size due to the heart. Right, the left lung is made of 2 lobes, so this one is only 2 because of the heart sitting here, right? That you can see this weird shape that it has right here. It's because of the heart. And then your right lung has 3 lobes, which is why when you're looking at the trachea and then the bronchi, you can see that there is 1, 2, 3 bronchi for the 3 lobes, and then there's 1, 2 bronchi here for the 2 lobes, right? So they're very spongy looking too. All right, something also that's important that we had talked about a little bit before is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is physically separating everything in your chest from everything below. Your diaphragm is used to help your lungs breathe though. So when it contracts, cavity increases and air is drawn in. So what that means is the diaphragm will actually come down. So contracting means this muscle right here moves downward, making a lot more space for your lungs, so you're inhaling, right? You're drawing in more oxygen. When it relaxes, it likes to go back to this spot right underneath, nestled under the lungs, so it comes up, so the cavity decreases, and that's when the air is pushed out. So you need your diaphragm in order to breathe, right? So every time I draw in, the diaphragm moved down, and then when I relaxes and I exhale, it came back up. So respiration, so this is breathing, right? We do two different types of breathing, external, internal. So external is exchanging gases between the atmosphere and your blood, and then we also have internal respiration, right, which is gases between blood and cells of the body. And kind of like everything else, it goes from a higher pressure to a lower pressure, right? High concentration to low concentration. And then the oxygen is used for cellular respiration, right? So that's why bio is important, because it goes along with this. So we kind of talk about how you're physically taking in oxygen from the outside, and then we have to also talk about your blood exchanging this oxygen with your cells, because your cells need it for cellular respiration. And just like everything, there's a concentration gradient, and it wants to go from a high place to a low place. So if a body cell has a lot of carbon dioxide, clearly it's going to want some more oxygen, right? Because there's not a lot. So this is just a little bit into respiration. I don't want to get too far, but so you have inhaling, air moving into lungs. The rib muscles are going to contract, so that way it expands. So your rib cage gets bigger, that makes sense. The diaphragm contracts and moves down, right? It's making space. So there is an increase in space. Air pressure inside the body is lower than outside. So because there is not as much air on the inside of the body than on the outside, the air wants to come in where there's not a lot of it. Makes sense. So when you inhale, all of these things have to happen. Air moves in because there's a lower pressure than outside. The rib muscles contract, the diaphragm contracts, and all of the space inside your chest increases. That is just to make sure that you can get as much air as possible. When you exhale, right, air is moving out of the lungs because the air pressure inside the body is higher than outside, so that's how air is able to move outward. So air is moving outward. Your rib muscles finally relax, so your rib cage can contract and go back to normal. The diaphragm relaxes and moves up, so your chest cavity decreases, which again makes a lot of sense. And you can try this and just pay extra close attention to when you're breathing. Taking a deep breath, kind of notice what your body does. Your chest puffs out a little bit because it's making space for your lungs to expand. When you exhale real deeply and try to get a lot of the air out of the lungs, you also notice that everything kind of becomes compact, right? It decreases in size because you're getting rid of all the air. Great. So we're going to stop there. I have a little bit of some questions for you to answer. Also, next week, I'm going to actually create a little kind of like a model. I'm going to create a model, which you guys can also try it as well. I'm going to tell you the list of things to get if you would like to try it, to demonstrate how the lungs are going to look and how they behave. It's very easy things to obtain. Check it out, try it out with me. All right, cool guys.